Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Why silver should do well this year. Let's explore. That's probably a question that most of us can answer. I mean, it's quite obvious. There's a lot that's gone on in the past year that really should have propelled silver prices upward, but it did not. And there's reasons for it. We've discussed that ad nauseum in 2021. And we're going to take a look at this from a slightly different angle. I'm going to be referencing an article from Stock News about that talks a little bit about this in a different way. Partial technical analysis, but also just some really, I think, common sense approaches to where silver is and where it could go by the end of this year. And we know about 2021 and how poorly it performed. And there is now, we're seeing what is going to be, according to this author here in this piece, that he thinks that we could see silver get up to $30 an ounce in this year with a volatile range. And he also says that the long-term picture has rarely looked better. So the worst indicator first is the silver to gold ratio, and it's continued to underperform over the past several months and has slid below its long-term moving average. This is a negative development given that the healthiest environment for silver with the most alpha is when silver is trading above this key moving average. While we're below it, the silver to gold ratio is still attempting to make a higher low versus last year's levels. So while we've seen a slight downgrade from a bullish reading to a neutral reading, the above indicator is still not showing any red flags as of yet. But keep in mind, the gold to silver ratio is really dependent upon how the metals performed in tandem. And see, silver is seen much more as a commodity, as a very diverse commodity than gold is. Gold is treasured. Silver is used. Over half of its uses are in things like photovoltaics and in the automotive industry. We know what's coming with electric vehicles and with anything, even if the automobiles stay gasoline power for quite a long time and EVs don't make the transition as fast. One thing is for sure, we are going to see more electronics in vehicles, whether they are internal combustion engines or not. So there's going to be a growing demand for silver, either way you look at it. Obviously, there's going to be hiccups in the supply chain. We're still dealing with that right now. But I have a feeling that probably some of this will normalize to some level, not making the attempt to predict that it's going to completely recover in 2020. But I believe, or in 2022, but I do believe that we will see some sort of normalization of the supply chains, which means there's going to be a greater demand for silver. So the sentiment is that at a slightly bullish reading, there's more market participants being bearish than bullish, is what the sentiment is now. We know that has kind of been the case ever since the silver squeeze movement. We've seen dips below the 15% level that produce strong rallies in the coming months, and that means that we're seeing the sentiment now and there's a recovery period. Typically that's what happens, and it shoots up. So we need to see lower lows or higher lows and higher highs, and that is kind of what is on deck potentially for this year. The bearishness among market participants is surprising, with nearly 3 bearish market participants for every 1 bullish, because silver has broken out above its downtrend line and appears to be building the right side of what's known as the cup base, and that's holding a pivotal of $21.50 an ounce support, and that's kind of where the lows we saw in 2021. And it's trying to begin a new uptrend and resume its cyclical bull market, which would confirm to a close, essentially, if the way things are going now, analyzing it would be above $27 an ounce. Long-term outlook could not be more bullish, when we look at the bigger picture, as we know, fundamentals, we know what's coming, and even if it doesn't fully break out in 2022, perhaps in 2023, I mean, there are some stops to some of these big spending packages from Congress, but obviously there's a lot of money that is being pumped out, and there are a lot of bills that have been passed that are very much a part of that Keynesian economic theory, and we have inflation that's still hovering over us, and the Fed cutting rates that is actually going to potentially, or raising interest rates, and that's going to potentially mean that we are going to see some lows before we see some of the highs this year. And the last time we saw a breakout from a multi-year base in silver was in 2004, and the metal consolidated for over a year to reset its overbought reading. And it rallied over 50% in 2006 following a consolidation period in 2005. We don't really talk about the mid-2000s when it comes to silver as much as we talk about what happened in the last decade. So if we were to see something similar to what we saw then, this means that silver could easily take a run at the $29 an ounce to a $30 an ounce level before year end. That's not taking into account what we are seeing on the geopolitical side and what we are seeing also on the fundamental side with the economy and with greater demand and greater diverse uses for silver. Silver Institute predicts that there's going to be stronger demand in 2022 than we've seen in the past. And I believe that could be the case if these supply chains come around and we don't have any more hiccups in the system. But all of that could come to a screeching halt, or at least the closest thing to it, if we see bad economic news and bad economic indicators and increased inflation. And I believe that would actually prove well to see silver ride the coattails of gold, and which means that the ratio would narrow there. A greater demand for silver, and silver actually being utilized and manufactured through the supply chain process, could mean higher prices as well, and a narrowing of the gold to silver ratio. So that is, I think, somewhat of an interesting approach here. And he's not making these wild predictions in this article that I'm referencing here, which I think is good. And he's approaching it more from a technical level. But again, I think there's some things missing in here. And I wanted to insert my commentary in there as well. So that's kind of where that news is where he is thinking the price is going to go. There is mixed reports as to where silver is going to go, as we know, we've talked about. But in the end, it's about long-term. And long-term is looking even beyond a year out. Now, one criticism one can make of that scenario is that if you make a prediction that's 5 years out, anything could happen. And you're not going to be held to that prediction because by the time the fourth year or even the second year comes into play, people are going to forget about it. And that's one thing that I have reminded throughout 2021. I've reminded my audience about my prediction because I think it's important in some ways to have a little bit of accountability, but also to remind folks not to take my predictions or anybody's predictions all that seriously. Take them for a grain of salt. There are different things that can come into play that you can make an argument for or against. And it seems like in this kind of environment, it seems like there's a lot more things you could say that would lead silver to rise instead of fall this year. Will it keep up with inflation? I don't know. If it rises 6% and we continue to see 7% inflation, no, it does not. It may rise in price, but it does not preserve your wealth in the coming year. And those are the kind of things you have to consider as well when you're holding silver, especially in the physical form when there's premiums involved. Still think it's wise to do so, and it's good to think long term, and I think that's what it's about. If we go back 2 or 3 years, silver's doing fairly well compared to 2 or 3 years ago. But I haven't actually measured what it is doing in comparison to inflation from 2 or 3 years ago to now, but my guess is it's probably pretty close, especially when you consider premiums at the time of selling the silver. So there you have it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.